There are cries so deep they never make it to the lips. In a small home nestled between a barren field and a forgotten village, a woman named Alia knelt alone by her window. The world around her slept, but she could not. Every time she closed her eyes, all she saw was loss. Loss of time. Loss of dreams. Loss of strength. Alia had prayed every night for years. Not casual, passing prayers, but soul-bearing pleadings. And yet, the heavens remained quiet. "Have you forgotten me, Lord?" She whispered. "I have not asked for riches or greatness. Only a sign, just a whisper that you still see me." And though the stars shimmered overhead, there was no response. Or so she thought. Far above the earth, beyond time and sound, a court was in session. Angels stood on either side of a long golden pathway that led to the throne. A scroll floated in the air. It pulsed with light and wept with ink, the written cries of God's people. The cries of the faithful. The cries of those who kept believing even in silence. Among them was Alia's voice. Soft but persistent. One of the attending angels, cloaked in robes that shimmered like dawn, stepped forward. His name was Seriel, the angel of answered petitions. "This cry has reached the threshold," he said. "It has been tested, refined, and proven sincere. The time has come." Heaven's great king, seated in light unapproachable, nodded once. With that, the scroll caught fire. Not with destruction, but with permission. A trumpet sounded, not like one of war, but of commissioning. Seriel bowed, his wings stretching wide, revealing feathers of crystal and flame. The one who cries in silence has been heard. The answer she longs for is not what she expects, but it is what she needs. "I will go." Heaven opened a corridor. Stars bowed as he descended. Through dimensions unseen by human eyes, the angel flew, his wings carrying more than light. They carried the answer. But before he could arrive, darkness stirred. In the shadows of the spiritual realm, a presence hissed. Kavath, the prince of delay, had waited for this moment. He had been the one who whispered doubts into Alia's ear, who tied her prayers in knots and stretched the silence to its breaking point. When he saw Seriel's descent, he snarled. "So the answer has been released, not if I can stop it." He summoned his forces, not to fight head-on, but to distract, delay, derail. Their mission: to intercept Seriel before he could reach Alia. That night, Alia finally fell into a restless sleep. In her dream, she stood in a vast desert under a blood-red sky. She was surrounded by mirrors, each reflecting versions of herself, one angry, one broken, one silent, one glowing. She approached the glowing version, who looked at her and whispered, "Heaven is not death." The delay was not denial. "Hold on. Something is coming." She awoke gasping, tears in her eyes, heart pounding. The clock struck 3:33 a.m. Outside, the wind shifted. The night no longer felt empty. As dawn approached, Alia returned to her prayer window. There, resting on the ledge, was a single feather. It shimmered faintly with gold and fire. She stared at it, trembling. This was no bird's gift. This was a sign. A whisper rose in her spirit, not loud, but unmistakable: the answer is already in motion. And though her circumstances hadn't changed yet, something in her had. Hope had returned. And so had heaven's movement. Alia stood at the edge of her field, the feather still in her hand. No one else could see it glow, but she could feel it radiate warmth. And yet, nothing around her had changed. The bills were still unpaid. Her body still ached from fasting. The silence from those she once trusted still stung. But now, something inside her whispered, "He's closer than you think." The hardest part was not the crying. It was the waiting after the sign. In the invisible realm, Seriel soared through unseen corridors toward Earth, the answer in his wings. But as he drew closer, a thick fog rose to meet him, the cloud of interference. Tabitha's forces had unleashed waves of confusion, distraction, and spiritual fatigue. They weren't strong enough to destroy Seriel, but they could slow him. The angel's wings beat harder. Every inch of progress required divine resistance. Why are they allowed to fight me? Seriel asked the heavens. A voice answered, because the waiting prepares her for the weight of the answer. Back on Earth, Alia returned to the same spot every morning, where she first found the feather. And though no new signs appeared, she kept coming. Her waiting became a kind of worship. Her questions turned into declarations. I still believe. Even in silence, I trust you. If the answer never comes, you are still my God. And that, more than the waiting, moved heaven again. Because God is not only moved by desperation. He is moved by devotion in drought. 3 days later, Alia woke up at 3:33 a.m. again. This time, her room was filled with a stillness so thick it felt alive. She looked outside. The sky, usually dark, glowed faintly blue, like the inside of a sapphire. Clouds didn't move. Stars stood still. And in the silence, she heard a whisper, "He is on his way. Do not stop watching. Do not stop preparing." She didn't know what it meant fully. But something in her quickened. She cleaned her house. She baked bread. She made room. The next day, she knelt again in prayer. As she worshipped, a strange oil began to drip from her ceiling, fragrant, thick, golden. It fell on her hands. It soaked her prayer rug. It coated her forehead like a crown. Alia fell to the ground, shaking, not in fear, but in recognition. "You're here," she whispered. "Even if I cannot see you yet. I feel your answer getting closer." And miles above, Seriel finally broke through the last of Tabitha's fog. Seriel, though weary from spiritual warfare, approached Alia's home. His wings carried not just the answer, but a heavenly decree. He looked at her house and smiled. "She's ready," he said. Not just for what she asked, but for what she never dared to imagine. His wings pulsed once, lighting the sky with glory. And as he descended, a sound like many waters filled the atmosphere. Alia jolted awake. Her entire body was trembling. She ran to the window, nothing. She opened her door, silence. She stood outside, and saw the moon glowing gold. It was as if creation was holding its breath. Her answer was not just on the way. It was at the door. The veil between heaven and earth had thinned. Seriel hovered just above Alia's home, wings stretched wide, radiating holy fire. But just before he could release the answer into her life, a final wave of resistance surged upward from the unseen realm. Kavath, the prince of delay, appeared. "You may have broken through," he snarled, "but she still doubts. Her heart still fears. I can stop you." But Seriel, filled with the fire of God's decree, didn't flinch. "You misunderstood the delay," the angel replied. "You thought it would break her, but it built her." Then, with a voice that shook the realm, Seriel declared, "By the authority of the one who sent me, let the answer fall." And with that, light split the sky, and the heavens poured themselves out. In Alia's room, everything vibrated. Walls pulsed. Windows trembled. The very air bent under weight she couldn't see but deeply felt. She collapsed to her knees. Her body couldn't handle the glory descending. But her spirit welcomed it, like a dry sponge absorbing living water. Then came the moment, a voice, not her own, echoed within her, "What you thought was forgotten, was being formed. What you thought was lost, was being led back to you. What you thought was silence, was strategy." Alia wept, not in sorrow, but in surrender. "I receive it," she whispered. "Whatever it is, however it comes, I receive it." Seriel gently unfurled the scroll he carried. The words were not written in ink but in living flame. Each line glowed and pulsed, shaped by every cry Alia had poured out across the years. The scroll read, approved. Restored. Appointed. Sent. Seriel lowered it into the spirit of the woman below. The moment it touched her, everything changed. Outside her window, the wind shifted. Flowers that had withered suddenly bloomed. The barren tree in her yard gave off a single blossom. Birds that hadn't sung in weeks filled the morning with melody. And in her home, Alia's once dim oil lamp flared up without cause, fire without flame, heat without smoke. She stood up. Everything inside her said, "This is it." At exactly 3:33 p.m., a knock echoed through her home. It wasn't loud, but it reverberated through her spine. She opened the door. No one was there. But lying at her doorstep was a sealed envelope, glowing faintly. Trembling, she picked it up. The seal bore a symbol she'd never seen before, 3 intersecting circles, surrounded by flame. Inside was a single sheet, "You have been seen. You have been sent for. Prepare to move." Later that night, as she sat by candlelight, the envelope crumbled into dust. And from that dust emerged another feather, larger than the first. When it touched her skin, words formed in her mind, "3 people will come to confirm your next step. Don't explain. Just move. The time for asking has ended. The time for walking has begun." She didn't fully understand it, but she didn't need to. She had something stronger than understanding now. She had peace. At that same moment, a businessman in another nation woke up from a dream about a woman named Alia. A pastor in a city Alia had never visited felt led to prepare a room for, the one who carries the new fire. A widow in a distant town received a divine nudge to travel and give away the last of her inheritance, to someone she'd never met. The answer wasn't just falling on her life. It was weaving its way through the lives of others. Heaven's orchestration had begun. It is one thing to receive the answer. It is another thing to carry it. Alia had waited for years. And now that her breakthrough had finally come, it wasn't what she expected. The scroll had been delivered. The feather had returned. The voice had spoken. But now came the part few prepare for, the battle to walk in what was given. The blessing was real. But so was the resistance. Her body began to feel heavy. Not in sickness, but in weight. It was the weight of heaven's trust, now resting on her shoulders. "Lord, why is this so hard, even now?" she whispered. And the answer came. "Because what I gave you carries authority. And anything with authority is tested." Just as foretold, 3 people showed up at her door within 3 days. The first was an elderly man she'd never seen before. He simply said, "It's time," handed her a small key, and left. The second was a woman with piercing eyes who handed Alia a worn book, saying, "Everything you need to navigate the coming days is in here." The third was a young child who walked up to her gate, handed her a small folded note with 3 words, "You are ready." Alia opened the note. Inside, those words began to glow with fire. And at that moment, her entire house shook. Kaveth had failed to stop the angel. But now he launched his last strategy: discouragement, disorientation, and distraction. Alia started to feel random waves of confusion. Doubts re-emerged. Was this really God? What if I'm deceived? What if I mess it up? Every time she tried to move forward, something broke. Her roof leaked. Her food spoiled. Her closest friend stopped calling. But she remembered the dream, the feather, the scroll. She remembered the silence that once nearly broke her. And now she chose not to ask why, but instead whispered, "Even now, I still trust you." The book she had received held secrets. It wasn't full of instructions but of reminders. Verses she had once memorized but forgotten. Promises she'd once believed but laid down. And as she read them aloud, her room began to glow. The pages turned into fire. The fire turned into presence. And the presence turned into strength. The battle wasn't meant to break her. It was meant to build the muscles of her faith. On the 7th night after the scroll was delivered, Alia had a dream. She stood on a mountain before multitudes of people, but no one could see her. Then a voice like thunder said, "Lift the feather." She raised the feather from her doorstep, and suddenly she became visible. All who saw her fell to their knees, not in worship of her, but in recognition of God's hand. She woke up with tears streaming down her face. Not from fear. Not from joy. But from certainty. Seriel appeared again, but this time in her dream fully visible. Wings glowing, eyes like fire, voice like melody and justice intertwined. Alia, daughter of promise. You were not just waiting for the answer. You were being formed to become the answer for others. Now rise. Walk. Speak. Release. The time has come. Then he extended his hand. In it was a ring made of light. Your authority has been sealed. He placed it on her finger, and she awoke. The next morning, Alia stepped outside. The wind carried her scent farther than she knew. Everywhere she walked, people began to feel peace. Her voice broke chains when she spoke softly. Her prayers shifted atmospheres. What had been poured into her was now being poured through her. But she hadn't forgotten the secret. It all began in the silence. It all started with a cry heard by heaven. It began with a whisper. Alia stood in the town square, uncertain why she'd been led there. The wind was still. The people moved around her without notice. She looked ordinary. Invisible. But in the spirit, she was radiant. And then she saw her. A woman on the steps of the courthouse, sobbing with her face buried in her hands. Alia walked toward her, unsure what to say. But the closer she got, the more she felt her spirit burn. Words formed on her tongue, not hers, but heaven's. You are not forgotten. What you lost is not the end of your story. Heaven has heard you, and what's coming is greater than what was taken. The woman looked up, eyes wide. How did you know what I prayed this morning? Alia smiled gently. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Word spread fast. Not by Alia's mouth, but by the people who felt something when they encountered her. Peace in their homes. Healing in their bodies. Visions in their dreams. Hope where despair once ruled. And always, a single feather left behind. No one saw her leave them. But the feather was heaven's seal, the angel's trace. What once was just for Alia, was now flowing through her to others. One night, as she prayed beneath the stars, Seriel returned. He knelt before her. She knelt with him. Why me, she asked. Why choose someone so hidden, so forgotten? Seriel looked deep into her eyes. Because heaven doesn't choose by fame, but by faithfulness. You carried the silence. Now you carry the sound. With that, Seriel's wings stretched wide and released one final gust of wind. It swept across the land. It stirred the hearts of many. And they, too, began to dream. In distant cities. A boy began to weep in prayer without knowing why. A businessman left his career to build a home for the broken. A sick mother was healed after finding a feather beneath her hospital bed. The movement had begun. Not a church. Not a brand. Not a leader. But a holy echo. A whisper passed from soul to soul, birthed by one woman's cry, carried by one angel's wings, multiplied by divine fire. Alia never sought recognition. She never wrote books or held crusades. But years later, people still told stories about a woman whose voice shifted storms. They never knew the decades she cried alone. They didn't see the nights she almost gave up. They never heard the silence she endured. But heaven knew. And heaven remembered. And heaven used it all. On the last day of her earthly life, Alia sat beneath her favorite tree. She smiled, not because everything had been easy, but because everything had been worth it. As her eyes closed for the final time, a feather drifted from the sky and landed gently on her chest. Seriel stood beside her, invisible to all but the realm that mattered. "Well done, beloved," he whispered. "The answer was always more than what you'd receive. It was always about what you'd become. If you're reading this, it's not by accident. The same God who heard Alia's cry has heard yours. The same angel who carried her answer is still moving. The silence isn't absence. It's strategy. The delay isn't punishment. It's preparation. And the answer, it's coming. In His time. In His way. And when it arrives, it will carry more than provision. It will carry purpose. So don't give up. Because the angel is already on the way.